who's a friend of mine. She's looking after modern workplace and system security at Microsoft. Mahvish Atif, she's going to talk about securing productivity in a digital world. And again, in the interest of time, I would say please restrict your questions to one or two maximum. Even she has to leave for another meeting after this. Please give a big hand for, put together a big hand for Mahvish Atif.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope I'm audible. So good to meet all of you after, I believe, we had this in 2019. So we are meeting after exactly 2 years. So really happy to meet all of you today, and it's a packed audience today, so that makes me all the more happy. And before we begin on the keynote that I have prepared today, I have a question, and I want to know who can tell me the significance of this month of October? What is the significance of this month? Yes. मैं भी पैदा हुई थी इसके अलावा. Cyber security awareness in Pakistan. Okay. Anyone else? Any of the ladies in the room? Yes, please. I heard that. Pinktober. Yes, 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 yes. So this month is globally celebrated as Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Now, another data-related question that I have for all my esteemed audience today, and that's very important for some alarming statistics that we're seeing in Pakistan. Why do you think that breast cancer awareness is gaining so much momentum in Pakistan? Would anyone be able to help me with that? It's a data-related question. Anyone? Rising cases, absolutely. But the exact data I want to share with you is that 1 out of 9 women are being tested positive for breast cancer, which means that you will see that with every passing year, there will be a lot of awareness. Recently, I think there are a few labs that have also opened up something like a free of cost mammography services for women over 40 years of age. So please, if you have, obviously we can count on our fingertips, 9 women. 1 out of 9 is reporting with cancer, right? So obviously this is something that we do not have to think a lot about. We can count on our fingers. So please try to create this awareness. If you feel that there are women 40 years or above, please try to make sure that they go and they're encouraged to go for an annual checkup. Okay, so thank you so much for giving me the time to and the platform to use this to create awareness on this topic. The second awareness that I want to create today, and that is about the rising cybersecurity economy, and why do we feel that it is important as we continue to be productive in a digital world. So today's keynote that I have prepared, I have some statistics, again, some data points that I want to share with you. And this is something that I have extracted from Microsoft's Digital Defense Report that was recently published, which means this is the recent report from October. So you can just Google search Digital Defense Report Microsoft, and you will find out that we have just recently published this report. And this basically tells you about the frequency and the fervency of cybersecurity and ransomware attacks, particularly in the past 12 months. So if you look at the past 12 months data, you will be able to see that the rise in cyber ransomware has been around 57%, okay? But more alarming for us is the fact that in between June and July 2021, this increase was reported at about 121%, okay? And now we are going to, I'm going to share, I'll try to make sure that this session, I try to impart as much knowledge as I can in the 30 minutes that I have. So some of the reasons that I was looking into the same report and I was able to find out was that there were basically 2 reasons. One of them was, it's an inevitable reason as the world continues to move forward, transistors are becoming cheaper, technology is becoming cheaper. So these malicious actors are getting access to the same scalable raw compute power that people like you and I have, right? And they're increasingly making use of cloud computing technology, the raw power, the scalable power of the cloud, to be able to be more effective, more agile in their operations. I'll give you a very, very simple example. There's something called a password spray and a brute force attack. And these two attacks are basically aiming identity, okay? And a brute force or a password spray is nothing but a bot that is using a machine learning algorithm to use a lot of combinations, millions of combinations of username and passwords to be able to compromise an account. So do you think that these people would be able to do that with an on-premises compute power? No, and that's where they end up using the power of the cloud, okay? The second thing, again, this extract is something that I have taken from the same report, and this is showing that on the dark web, this skill set is growing cheaper every year, okay? So if you would like to purchase a ransomware kit, for instance, you can get that for less than $100 per month. And if you have, greater malicious intents, and if you're targeting something like a distributed denial of service attack, that is a little expensive, and that's around somewhere slightly more than $300 per month. So this is something that is quite alarming, and I wanted to share with you. But the reason why this frequency and this fervency of ransomware is important is because of a simple mathematical equation, which basically describes information security risk. So information security risk is defined by multiplying impact by likelihood, okay? And likelihood is nothing but what I just explained in my earlier slides, which is the frequency, okay? So just imagine for a second that whatever your calculation of impact is, I know a lot of companies that even try to manipulate the impact, right? But whatever your calculation of impact is, so let's suppose you have calculated that, okay, in the event of a ransomware, we would end up having an impact of 10% of our annual revenue. But imagine, because likelihood is increasing, then obviously it means that your information security risk is at a steady incline, and it's continuously increasing. And because of this, it calls for the awareness. It calls for the awareness, just like the awareness that I spoke in the start of this keynote. This calls for an awareness, not just on educating ourselves on what are the solutions available, but also understanding how these behaviors, how do these bad actors move, right? And how do they operate, right? And most importantly, this calls for no longer being complacent when it comes to cybersecurity. It calls for no longer believing in an approach that is just looking at malware remediation. It calls for a framework, for a platform that is helping you gain successful adversary eviction. Now I'm going to take a few, maybe less than a minute, to just go back in time, maybe some 20 years ago, and try to understand how did we end up getting here, right? So some 20 years ago, information security and securing our high-value assets was a very simple task, because we believed in the concept of parameters, and the way we gave access to our assets was by poking holes into the walls of our perimeter. But every now and then the world witnessed events where, either due to malicious insider activity, that could be an employee unhappy with their managers, or simply an employee looking to move out of the organization, or obviously malicious external factors that resulted in the exfiltration of data. And the industry's response to this was building and investing more and more into hardening the perimeters, to the extent that we end up building entire castles around our data. And then what happened was that after a few years, some change happened, and a fire-breathing dragon came in. And that dragon, what it did was it melted away at the walls of our physical and our digital worlds. And you know what that fire-breathing dragon is? That's our mobile phones. Okay, so that means that now we have an extended perimeter and an extended attention to look outside the perimeter as well. We have an increased focus to look into the devices that we are using, and the identities that are constantly in touch with our high value assets. And not to mention the fact that we have these attacks continuously increasing in the way that they're using technology. Obviously, all organizations are still trying to be in a process where they want to maintain their legacy infrastructure, whereas they are also trying to get innovative. And at the same time, there is an additional responsibility not just on SecOps, but even on IT. So these are the reasons that are calling for following something that is global, that is a best practices based platform, and that helps you understand that there is no such thing as security. No such thing as perfect security, sorry. And that is what is called the Zero Trust Framework. And once again, I would like to draw your attention that the Zero Trust Framework is not something that is proposed or it's being educated on by Microsoft, but this is something that has been put into action not just today, but as of many years by the Center of Internet Security. And what is the Zero Trust Framework and how can it, give this kind of an assumption that there's no such thing as perfect security, then how can it protect us? So it's very simple. It rests on 3 pillars, and the 3 pillars are listed on top, which you can see verify explicitly, which means that we need to move from assumption to explicit verification. So many times I have heard people tell me that, okay, you know what, any device, any user which is within our corporate network, that means that they should be allowed authentication, right? But Zero Trust Framework, that's where the Zero Trust Framework would challenge something like that, and it will say that no, even devices within your corporate network need to be verified explicitly with as many data points as possible, which means using a lot of machine learning, okay? And then the second one is using dynamic policies to provide just-in-time, on-demand access to your high-value assets. I think just in our last panel, Asif came up with this problem statement where non-malicious users, so your non-malicious users are having access to data, right? But you need to put controls that that access should not be something that is giving them superpowers to have access to the data for as long as they want, right? So that's where the dynamic policies on using the principle of least privileges really helps. And then the third one is quite self-explanatory, that is assuming breach, which means that because you are believing that there's no such thing as perfect security, so at all the layers of your defense in depth strategy, you are making sure that you're secure enough that if one of the defenses fail, you have a second defense that is going to protect the perpetration or the propagation of that attack. And I'm sorry, I hope you can see the screen. I was right in the middle. So this basically shows on the left and the right hand side, you will see that identity endpoints all the way from network to data. These are the pillars of your defense in depth strategy. We are all familiar with it. But there's a reason why identity and endpoints is placed on the right hand side. And that's because if you are someone wondering that how can I adopt and where can I start with respect to the zero trust, that's exactly where you start with. So you need to shift your focus from perimeter and firewalls to start thinking that because there is an exploded attack surface comprising of devices, comprising of identities, how do I start protecting my identities and my endpoints? Because I believe at the end of the day, no matter what you do with your data, no matter what DLP, classification, encryption that you plan for your data, but there has to be a process, like I said, comprising of multiple defenses so that your data cannot be breached, okay? And obviously the central nervous system, the brain of the zero trust framework is the security enforcement policy. And very shortly I will discuss what this is and how important it is to implement a successful zero trust strategy. And like I said, that because we need to start with identities and endpoints, so in today's discussion and considering that I would like to stick to 30 minutes only, so I'm going to talk a little bit about identity and access management. slightly share some technicalities with you. But this basically shows what are the features of a modern identity provider. So any modern identity provider should be able to provide you secure adaptive access. And nowadays we see that that is something that is being established with tokens. It should be able to provide a seamless user experience to employees, because every organization continues to invest in applications, continues to invest in applications that are supposed to make your employees more productive. But what if their experience is that, every time they have to log into the interface, they have to keep on remembering multiple usernames and password? Obviously, the user adoption of that application is going to be something not very successful. And then unified identity management means that no matter if you choose to stay on premises or if you choose to use a purely cloud-based identity management solution, you should be able to manage and as well as protect all the users that are there. And by users, I mean not just your employees, but even your customers, your regulators, or other guest users who are continuously accessing your applications. And then finally is simplified identity governance, and I think that's a very big topic in itself. And that is basically something that mirrors the HR joiner, mover, leaver process to make sure that at the inception, identities are created automatically. If there are any elevated privileges, if there are any privileges that needs to be revoked, this is not the task of IT, but it is an autonomous workflow in itself. So it's very surprising for me that multi-factor authentication is something that has gotten so much of importance nowadays. There is basically by regulation also, and it's a compliance requirement that all financial sector organizations need to implement. In fact, they had to implement MFA as of last year. I think it was December 2019, if I'm not wrong, okay? So why is it getting so much of importance all of a sudden? Whereas MFA is a technology that has been with us since 1986. Again, the answer to it is because cloud computing has made it very, very much more easy to implement, right? So previously, implementing MFA required management of tokens, connecting the identity stores with the applications, and that in itself was posing security loopholes. But now, with the pervasiveness of technology, with the presence of SAML, which is Secure Reserved Markup Language, you can set up MFA in a matter of minutes, right? And obviously, MFA is something that kills around 99.9% identity-based attacks. But let me assure you that this is not enough. We need to shift our focus to a deeper optics when we talk about our defense in depth strategy. And I personally believe, and I think this is something where I really love creating the awareness, is that MFA without conditional access is not as strong, and it's not as, what you can say, it's not as effective when we try to balance productivity and security, okay? So what is conditional access? Conditional access is basically a runtime scoring of a session, okay? And why is it so powerful is that because it's using a lot of data points, and these data points are coming not just from the identification, not just from the kind of devices that you are using or that identity has logged into with whatever device, what's the health of that device, what is the compliance score of that device, where is this identity logging in from? So from user entity and analytics, you know that a particular identity is mostly getting access, requesting access from Karachi, right? And then all of a sudden there is an anomalous login from Russia. So that obviously calls for anomalous behavior, and it flags as something that is obviously not normal, right? And then what are the authentication methods that identity, that request is using at that time? And what happens is that using these signals at runtime, with the help of machine learning, something is calculated which is called a session risk or a session score. That helps you define and put additional controls which are listed as follows. So either you completely deny access, or you require MFA, or you ask for password reset. So this is how your MFA becomes more powerful when combined with the security enforcement policy that is brought about by conditional access. And like I said, this backbone or this central nervous system of the dynamic policy is something, the cornerstone of zero trust framework. But we need to understand that it's not about simply protecting from the current attack. We need to understand that it's more about modernizing your security operations in such a way that when it is getting so much of contextual data, when it's getting so much of information, it should be able to feed this information back into the preventative controls so that these kind of incidents do not happen again. So it's not just about protection, it's about continuously learning and then putting that learning back to make sure that your posture is made more stronger. Seamless user experience is something that I discussed earlier. So obviously, an identity can be made up of immutable assets as well. So you do not have to remember your multiple usernames and passwords, and you should be able to have an immutable identity so that you can get access to the applications that you love and do the work that you love doing, right? And now I'm going to describe something that I find very important, and I would like to make this as part of my discussion today, and that is to understand how do modern identity providers work. A lot of people feel that the term Azure Active Directory means that it's a completely cloud-based identity and access management solution, which is not the case, because with Azure Active Directory, you can continue to have your users provide their username and password on premises on the client apps, but the role of the modern identity provider is to provide you the token that I spoke about. And tokens are nothing but a simple cryptographic, not simple, it's a very powerful cryptographic signature, and it has some elements that are called claims. Now, one of that claim is the immutable identity that you have. Some of these claims could also be such as the expiration claim or the destination claim. And here's the interesting part, that you will understand that this kind of a solution is helping you be secure. Because, so for instance, let's assume for a second that a particular identity is compromised and you have the destination claim which is meant for this server number 1. So if there is any cause for any lateral movement from this server, because like I said, there's no such thing as perfect security, the identity is compromised. Now, how do we prevent this from propagating to the server number 2 and other servers infecting your environment? And that is with something that I just mentioned, that is the destination claim. So as soon as this token is passed on to the other server, it will be dropped, it will be useless. And similarly, you can use the concept of claims to define something like expiration. So that is what we mean when we talk about just-in-time access. So another way to look at this entire concept is to understand that you can use hybrid technologies, you can use hybrid identity verification to not only secure your on-premises identities, but you can actually extend the 21st century standards of security, such as MFA, single sign-on, the concepts of tokens such as expiration and destination, to further protect your on-premises assets, obviously also protecting the ones that you're using in the cloud. And any identity would not make sense if we talk about how we are working nowadays, if it is only looking after and managing the employees within your organization. So it has to extend the same security enforcement policy, the same conditional access, the same MFA to anyone, a guest access, a guest who wants to join a Teams webinar that you are hosting, any guest who wants to access, or your customers, if you're in the business of building applications, customer-facing applications that they love to use, and that's what the essence of your brand is. So how do you make sure that these guests and these customers are getting the same protocols of security when they log in? Obviously, again, that is something that you can extend to a wider and a larger audience. Okay. And this is the final piece when we talk about the features of a modern identity provider or a modern identity solution. And that is that it should be able to automate your digital identities, the digital signature with respect to your identities. So like I said, as soon as new employees get provision through whatever HR system that you're using, those identities should be able to move seamlessly within the organization, whether they're being promoted, whether they're changing locations, all the way up to the time when the person resigns or retires, whatever comes first. So that is what identity lifecycle, and that's what how you establish identity governance. And like I said, it's very important to ensure that there is many times non-malicious intent as well, and there is something that is requiring on-demand access to your high-value assets. And this is something that we can very easily achieve with privileged identity management, which is obviously giving you time-based access to sensitive information. And as soon as that time expires, the users return back to their normal privileges. Any identity and access management solution would be incomplete without taking into consideration devices. Why? Because identities along with devices have actually created this exploded attack surface area for hackers, for cyber security service providers, right? So this inflated and exploded attack surface needs to be taken care of in full consideration. Again, the industry's response to protecting devices earlier was to harden devices. But now we all understand that you can very easily partition your devices. You can have your corporate devices separated, corporate applications separated from your personal applications. And something which is very common in Karachi, that if your device gets stolen, if your device gets, you tend to lose it for whatever reason. We all know what that reason is. So you can have something such as selective remote wipe, making sure that the sensitive information, the corporate information that is present in your device is removed remotely. So that's all that I wanted to discuss about a modern identity provider. And I would like to close my, my talk with a simulation of a real event that occurs. And this is something that is mirroring some of the leading attacks that I have seen. So it could be, I'm not going to name them, but I have seen that this pattern is common to a lot of ransomware that has been reported, not just in the past, but even previously, recently as well, right? So always the starting point are the productivity applications that the users are very much familiar with, and usually 99.9% of the time, that's your email and your O365, right? You get an email which has got a URL or a link that needs to be clicked on, and if you won't do it, then something will happen. This kind of an information that you get, right? One advancement that we have recently, Microsoft has recently delivered, is that now you can protect these links, these URLs, even in the context of Teams conversations. So earlier, we were providing sandboxing and the ability to quarantine these malicious links only in O365, but now this has been extended to communications in Teams as well, right? And what happens is that once any user, which obviously is a non-malicious user, clicks on that email, attempt is used to inject a PowerShell script so that the device becomes infected. And once the device becomes infected, attempts are used, for instance, password spray or brute force. So right here, you will see that that's where something like a password spray, which is a machine learning algorithm that is using thousands of combinations of username and password to compromise a single identity. And that's where all the fun happens, because after that, it's all about, roaming around in the network until you get access to privileged credentials so that you can get access to the applications, and that's where, exfiltration occurs. So this is something that we need to understand, because like I said, even when I talk to people from engineering, what they always try to tell me, that we need to embrace the mindset of a hacker. We need to understand how they behave, how they try to propagate, right? So we need to understand that this is something that I have just explained in less than 2 minutes. But this scenario, in most cases, remains within your environment for days and sometimes weeks, unnoticed, even after the fact that SecOps has said, oh, we have detected that there is a phishing email, let's zap those emails. Oh, these are the malicious identities, these identities have been compromised, let's disable those identities. Even after that, there is some form of cryptocurrency mining that is involved so that a backdoor can be created, and even after the ransomware is paid, they still have access to your environment. So that is what it means when you embrace a posture of zero trust. It means that at all the layers, all the different 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, you need to have your defenses. If not in all of them, you should understand and you should be aware that where should I start with, and I should have at least 2 areas where my defenses should be covered. So that is something that I wanted to have a simulation in front of you. And like I said, this is what the zero trust framework assumes. That is, there is no such thing as perfect security, which means that everyone, each one of you understands that cybersecurity is going to be something that requires continuous awareness, continuous learnings. There are these bunch of learnings that have been curated by our cybersecurity advisors from Corp and other people who are working with our data science experts. So if you feel that you want to take benefit from these learnings, these are guided learning paths that you can subscribe to and consume at your own pace. You can obviously reach out to me. Today I will have to rush because my daughter has a science fair and I promised her that I will be there. So if you feel that you would like to benefit from these trainings, you can talk to Akbar and he can let me know and just drop me an email and I will share the links with you. So I think that's something very important, and that's the last last bit of comfort that I want to assure you, that obviously our operational strength comes from people like you. Our strength comes from the learnings that we get from people like you and people who are experts in their field and are spanning across more than 30 countries across the globe. So there's a continuous feedback loop that tends to enrich all of the developments that we are doing. And if you feel and if you think that it's really important for you to understand where you stand in terms of any scoring that is proposed by CIS, so there's a cybersecurity assessment that Microsoft is running for their corporate customers. So you can subscribe to that. Again, you can send me an email and I will be more than happy to help you, get onto a path of awareness for your individual organization. So that's all for today. I don't know how I did on time, Akbar, but thank you so much. 5 minutes late? Not good. I'll take that for the awareness that I created in the first few minutes. So that's all good. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahvish, especially for the part where you scared us by saying that the attacks and the threats are not only multiplying in volume, but also in complexity. Although there were a lot of assurances, but I'm sure that is the part which catches most of the eye.